So welcome to my talk. I'm Marlena Compton, and we are going to ask the question today, is JavaScript like Java? So I'm imagining there are a few different types of people who have come in here to listen to my talk today. You may be started in JavaScript. You hear people complaining about Java all the time, like, what's up? And then they look at the JavaScript and they're like, this looks like Java. But it's like, what's going on here? So you want some information about this. Or it could be that you used to write Java. So this is the case for me. I started out in Java, and then later I switched to JavaScript. And we know JavaScript, so it's DOM and all of this stuff. But then suddenly I started seeing pieces of JavaScript that look like Java, and I was like, what is going on here? That may be you. Or there may be some people in here who just want to come in and popcorn and hate on Java a little bit. And haters, where would we be without them? Maybe we'd be winning a gold medal. That's okay. We're going to be taking a look at some code today, and just to make sure everyone's on the same page, I want to show you a little bit about it. So this is going to be a vacuum cleaner world. It's pretty familiar to everyone. Vacuums doing vacuumy things like moving around the floor, sucking up dirt. It's just a two-dimensional floor. So there's a full application that I have for this, and we're just going to look at this a little bit. So this is code that I pulled out of my college work from 2006, just so you know. And it would simulate running a vacuum, like it generates these little squares. It'll show you where it is. The vacuum moves around. When it turns something from a 1 to a 0, it's cleaning it up. And so this was my Java application. Little pieces right here. And I just wanted to show you that this is like from a working application to give you a little bit of context. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and full screen this. And here we are. And so now everyone has a little bit more context. Some of you may recognize Vacuum World. It comes from this artificial intelligence book. This was one of my favorite classes ever. I love this book. It just gives me warm fuzzies every time I open it, kind of like my Natasha Denona Sunset palette. For eyeshadow, which, yes, I'm wearing today. I love it. But back to Russell and Norvig. So here's a photo of the vacuum. And this is from chapter 2. So at this point, we're just going to be looking at a subset of this code. So I kind of want to be sure everyone's on the same page, and we all have different experiences with languages and things like that. So now you know where this comes from, and we can ask the question, is JavaScript like Java? So this is a question I was asking in like 2011, and this is the answer that I got. Of course not, noob. So as you can see, this is not a great answer for a couple of reasons. It's definitely very 2011. At the time, JavaScript was a very different language. I'd say it's matured quite a lot. We have a lot of new features. And the other part of this is we as a developer community have matured a lot. And we now know that it is insulting to call someone a noob for any reason. People come to this with all kinds of different experience. Maybe they haven't written a lot of JavaScript, but they might know a lot about C or Ruby or embedded systems, or maybe they had to work really hard on their code to make it through school, or your terrible code interview. So, I think the bottom line is people deserve more respect now. We kind of know that. So I won't belabor this anymore. It's just, this is not a name we need in our lives. So times have changed, JavaScript has changed. And today we want an answer that has a better attitude, that actually reflects where the language is today. And so to get to an answer, we're going to look at a little bit about where I come from language-wise, and then we're going to look at some syntax and side-by-side it and look at what's going on. And think about, like, why are these changes coming in? Why is JavaScript going in this direction? So to give you some context about me, I'll give you a little bit of my programming history. So I learned Java in college, and it wasn't my first language. C++ was my first language. Don't worry, we're not going to go there today. I used Java for undergrad. I also used it for my master's in software engineering, and I used it some at work. And it meant writing a lot of classes. So this is a class in Java. On line 1, you can see the class being declared. On line 5, there's a setter. There are a lot of getters and setters in Java. You have to have these in your classes. On line 9 is a constructor. So in Java, like in JavaScript, we call this constructor, like you type it out. But in Java, you give it the name of the class. In fact, the class is the main unit of work in Java. So in JavaScript, we think a lot about functions, functional programming. Everything's a function, passing things in, mixing it up. But in Java, it's really all about the class. And a lot of that's because Java was kind of designed to be this object-oriented language. And so classes also map to objects. And objects kind of gives you a way to think about the world around you. In our vacuum example, we've got, you've got different pieces you think about when you're vacuuming. You have the floor, have your vacuum, have your location where the vacuum is. But that's just one example. This object-oriented programming and modeling kind of gives you a way to think about the world around you too, like, like maybe an airplane taking off and landing, and you're using a queue to sort of manage that, or an artist drawing circles or squares or triangles. Almost like it's a JavaScript framework rendering shapes. And what I liked about this, working in this way of thinking with objects, was it gave me a really simple way to sort of like write down what I was modeling. Like in this case, this is the text from Russell and Norvig. And I did the old trick, maybe some of you know it, of circling the nouns and underlining the verbs. And it kind of tells you like what objects you're going to need, what kind of interactions you're going to have. And it's so simple. It's just, you can do this with a simple thing like this. Or if you have a more complicated problem you're trying to think through, you can write it down and try this with it, and some things might emerge for you. If nothing else, this was just a very simple way to look at larger systems and think about breaking them down. So Java, this is a major difference. Java is a statically typed language, right? Like we put the code through a compiler, And so that means that we have to give every piece in our code a type. So if you're coming at this from JavaScript, this is, maybe you worked with TypeScript, so this might be a little familiar. We've got a bunch of types in here. There's also, like on line 11, you'll see location. That's your own object that you've put together, and you can also use those as types. But everything has to have this in Java. Quite different from JavaScript. And the final piece that I always had in Java was I had a main function. And this is required so that the compiler knows where to start in your code. Sort of like if you're in React land, chances are you have that application component all the way up at the top, or the index.js or whatever. So something like this was a good way to kind of focus on the outcome that you wanted to see at the end of your application. What is this thing going to do? It's sort of like if you do the trick of writing a press release for what your app is going to do, and you're thinking about what you want the outcome to be. And I was having so much fun with this. So it took me a long time to learn and feel comfortable with Java. As I said, I learned it throughout my undergrad, which that was a few years. I also used it in my master's, and that was a few years. But at the end of it, I was finally thinking more about the problem I was trying to solve than the syntax I was using. And it felt like such a gift. But there was something kind of big missing here. And it had to do with the end result, which you maybe noticed when I ran my example earlier. At the end of all of these Java adventures, I didn't know how to put any of my awesome creations on the web. This points to the most obvious main difference between Java and JavaScript that I am not going to go into deeply here, but it is worth mentioning. So this is what it takes to build the web in Java, or at least what it took when I was figuring it out. Maybe they've gotten it together a little bit. This is when Java was not fun anymore. I know this is a boring slide. It's a really long list. And there was an O'Reilly animal phone book to go with each bullet point here. And that's the point at which I decided, I'm just going to step back from web development. And I ended up working in test automation for a long time because I just did not want to deal with this. So, and there might even be someone in here who's like, serverless, woo! But, if that's you, it's worth letting it sink in that there are others who will look at those servlets and think, is this really what it takes to do web? Get me out of here. So, okay, let's get away from, that's all we're gonna look at that. So at that point, I ended up at Mozilla where I was writing Python. And Python was fun. And you know what? I realized my Java days were over. Like, this was it. I was at Mozilla. Mozilla makes Firefox. There's a lot of Python there, but they also, this is where JavaScript was made. And JavaScript, it's the language of the web. If nothing else, working at Mozilla gave me a deep appreciation for the web and how it works and why it's important. So I gave up the Java and I didn't look back. I could see the importance of JavaScript for the web and everything around it. I could see, at the time, there were a lot of different web frameworks. There was no clear winner. Rails was getting really big. There was also Django. There were also like a dozen other JavaScript frameworks like Dojo and other ones that, just a bunch of them. But at the end of them, you would put in a little bit of JavaScript in your DOM, And at the time, people were using jQuery to just do the few things they needed to do. And it made it really great. So when I saw how dynamic all of this was, it was pretty easy to make the decision to start focusing on JavaScript instead. So I worked hard at shifting my headspace away from objects and thinking more about the DOM. So I just showed you the classes and the types and all of that. As you can see, it's like a very different headspace. So in JavaScript land, we're thinking more about functions. I found a mentor. I started learning the jQuery, learning how to test the JavaScript. And then my mentor was like, hey, Marlena, there's this React. You need to learn this React. I'm like, okay, all right. Finally, there's the one JavaScript framework I'm supposed to learn. So I go in, I start looking at it, and what did I see? I saw react.createClass. I'm wondering if anyone else had this moment of this, and then we started bringing in ES6, and there was even more Java-looking JavaScript, and it's like, what? What is going on? I just could not deal with this anymore. Even today, when I write, how this talk came to be is I had that day where I was writing yet another component where it extends React.component. I was like, okay, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm just going to go somewhere and rant about this for a bit. So, I see this. I just had this bag of emotions going on. I was shocked. Where did this even come from? I thought I was supposed to be doing functions, right? Those functions, functional programming, whatnot. And I had just forgot, I left all these objects behind, I'm going to do functions. I'm not going to do the inherent, I thought, okay, this is how far it went. I thought maybe I was literally smashing the patriarchy by getting rid of the class hierarchy in my code, right? I was really excited about this. But then secretly, I was also just kind of happy because I was like, I know what this is. I know where I am. And that's okay. So, JavaScript, I just had this moment of remembering when I suddenly switched and I gave up Java. And Java has a lot of structure to it, as you saw in the little bit that I showed you. There are all these things you have to define. It takes a while to learn. It does. And it can feel like you're writing a lot of code. But at the end of the day, there was a lot I was able to do with it. I could imagine a world, and then I could write the code to make it happen. That's a pretty powerful thing, which is actually why object-oriented programming was invented in the first place. So if you go back to read about what was happening when OO was first created, and imagine in the late 60s and 70s, back to languages like Simula or Smalltalk. This is late 60s, 70s. You'll read about researchers in academia or people at earlier tech companies like IBM or Bell Labs. Alan Kay, the co-creator of Smalltalk, has written a very long piece, very long dry piece about this. I challenge anyone to read the whole thing. I read some of it for you, so you don't have to. He was writing about how computing was something happening on college campuses or in these scientific research labs. People with extremely specialized knowledge. And look at the computers in these photos, right? These are not things you're going to sling in your backpack. So they were thinking about what was going to happen when you have computers that are liberated from this, right? Like, what's going to happen when they're on your wrist? They were thinking about this in the 60s. Who's even going to write that code? How are they going to think about this? Alan Kay said there would be millions of personal machines and users, mostly outside of institutional control. Where would the applications and training come from? Computing as we knew it couldn't survive. A little dramatic, you know, researchers. For this reason, they worked together to create something called object-oriented for attacking large problems of the professional programmer and making small ones possible for the novice user. So they made it for people like me who were, you know, struggling through their CS classes and wanting to find something exciting. And, you know, so I know what some of y'all are thinking. I did put the token white guy in there. You know, if you've noticed in my talk, I like to imagine the world how I think it should be and then make it so. You know, she who controls the spice controls the universe, anyway. Enough of this. Back to the vacuum. Or vacuum, yes, real world. It's pretty simple, nothing scary, just a vacuum, there's a floor. So here's the floor, code for the floor. And so this class, when I was getting this code to run again, this class was actually missing. It is a pretty simple piece of code. And took me not long at all to figure out what I needed to put in place, just because the Java was so explicit about what this code needed to be. So we've already seen this once. This is going to generate our floor. And yes. So here's what happens if I rewrite this in JavaScript. It's not that hard to do, obviously, but the thing that's missing is information, right? Like, and you can't really check when you pass it in, when you're initializing this. It could be anything. Like, you could pass a string into this floor, and it would be fine. Like, we're wanting that array, two little arrays. We want to know what size it's supposed to be, how dirty it's supposed to be. But JavaScript doesn't care. It doesn't care what you pass in. And so this was kind of what I was feeling when I was missing like return types and data types and all of this. And it was like, you know, these two rock climbing floors. What I felt was that Java was this one where there are all of these handholds and they're all over the place. So, you know, it's pretty easy to get up the wall. It's not going to take you very long. You'll get where you need to go. Whereas when I went into JavaScript, it was like, what am I supposed to put here? Where did this come from? Let me go look it up again. And so as a result, it just like, it took longer. It takes longer. So I also went and was like, well, what happens if I bring in some TypeScript? So have people in here been playing around with TypeScript or Flow or anything like that? Yeah? It is pretty nice. So for this, I looked at both of them. I'll be honest, Flow, I looked at it for 5 minutes and was like, I'm kind of bored with this. I'm going to go look at TypeScript. TypeScript was really easy to pick up, and I was able to put this together pretty quickly. I think that TypeScript probably does a lot of the same things that Java does, at least like syntactically. And the nice thing is it's a little more forgiving. So if you're in the position where you're wanting to try working with these types or making your code a little more explicit, I suggest giving TypeScript a try. And I'd like to come back for a minute to some of this React code that I was showing earlier. So this is a component that I recently wrote in just some little side project I'm doing, so I just threw it in here. And it's a very small component. Notice that up on the second line, we have our extends React component. So I went and I made a Java abstract class called React component. This is a super class. So if you think about inheritance in React and extends, you're inheriting from the React component superclass. I just made one over here with this abstract class, and I gave it an abstract method called render. And essentially what that does is it means that any class that says extend React component has to write this render. So it's basically it's sort of redoing the React component functionality with Java just because I felt like it, and it's what I think about anytime I see this extends React component. What cracks me up is how people in JavaScript land go on and on about functional programming. You know, immutable JS, blah, blah, you gotta be functional, immutable everything. And yet, here we are in React land, and we're totally using Java ideas about object-oriented programming. I think it kind of says something. So how about that question? JavaScript is going to get you to the web in ways that Java just can't. You know, at this point, I've made plenty of web applications. There's no comparison there. It's in the browser. It's the language of the web. But JavaScript is adopting more and more pieces and parts of OO. In fact, we saw TypeScript, which is JavaScript, run through a compiler. The cool thing is that you don't have to pull in all the structure and discipline at once. It's kind of up to you. So like, if you're working on some super huge problems and you want to be your best friend for later down the road, OO can maybe help you out some. Overall, I kind of think these two languages need each other a little bit. You know, learning about different aspects of each will help you be better at either. So if you have some big Java backend at your work, you don't have to be afraid of it. Maybe, maybe practice with some TypeScript. And that way you don't have to commit yourself to some big Java project before you start learning about this OO. And sometimes you want the TypeScript, sometimes you want a type system, sometimes it'll help you. Sometimes it's nice not to have to care about it too. Like, I really got used to this not needing to specify all of these things, and as a result, some of my code went a lot faster. So if JavaScript gets us onto the web, human-centric ideas like OO are what's going to help us live there more comfortably. So what's the answer? Y'all are going to hate me for this, but I'm going to leave this as an exercise for you to think about. Over lunch, which I'm definitely going to lunch, and it is about lunchtime. So if you have any questions about this or want to talk over what you think the answer is, feel free to find me later, maybe at lunch or in another talk. And thank you so much for your time today.